Hello, Steve Snodgrass here, President of the Omaha UFO Study Group. It has been a while, but as J. Allen Hynek quoted a Chinese philosopher, there's a time to fish and a time to mend your nets. Well, just like the sobered-up alcoholic pilot who destroyed the mothership in the film Independence Day remarked, "Hello, boys, I'm back." Yes, after mending my nets, I'm back with another discussion about the UFO ET hypothesis. Now, I'm not basing this presentation on the film Independence Day, but there is an interesting connection I am offering up that has to do with how the United States defeated the aliens in this film. That is, that aliens can best be thought of as a virus. But it's a little more complicated than that, so let's get to it. This presentation is called Alien Ontology, so I'd better define the term ontology here right up front. I'm going to offer two definitions. This first is from Wikipedia. Ontology is a branch of philosophy devoted to the philosophical study of the nature of being, becoming, existence, or reality, as well as the basic categories of being and their relations. Ontology deals with questions concerning what entities exist or may be said to exist, how such entities may be grouped, related within a hierarchy, and subdivided according to similarities and differences. This means I'll be discussing the reality, existence, becoming, and being of aliens, as well as the categories of aliens and their relations to us and everything else. You might think this means I'll be discussing which of the 11 dimensions they come from, or how the Greys come from Zeta Reticuli, the Reptilians come from Arcturus, and the Nordic-looking ones come from the Pleiades. No, sorry. I have no way of verifying such claims, and I'd like this to be a little more thoughtful than that. The other definition of ontology is that it is a specification of a conceptualization. It is about being so specific with your description of a concept and the relationships that can exist for an agent or a community of agents that it becomes a convincing philosophical argument. Yes, I'll be considering what we human beings are as intelligent agents and whether aliens can be considered intelligent non-human agents. But no, I will not be talking about the Men in Black type of agents. Sorry, again. The term agents in philosophy are what can be described as the cause of something. For example, there are two reasons why a pot on the stove may be boiling. One is that the molecules have had heat applied to them, making them jiggle and bounce around until the pressure forces steam out the top of the teapot. Or the other reason is that I wanted a cup of tea. The second reason requires an intelligent agent, namely me. One explanation isn't better than the other, they're just different. Anyway, I'm going to do my best to be so specific in my description of what an alien agent might be that you'll hopefully get my meaning. For example, I'll be talking more philosophically, summarized here by one of John Cleese's favorite bits from Monty Python. I will be talking about who you are, what you think you are, who I am, what I think I am, and how all this applies to what aliens might be. I'll be talking about what it means to be or not to be, vis-a-vis its entity, wondering whether an alien can be an intelligent agent when some of that agent is not an intelligent agent. And I'll do my very best not to lose you in the process. My purpose in this presentation is to provide an answer to these three questions about aliens. What are they? Whether we call them entities, beings, visitors, but also ghosts, fairies, gnomes, angels, demons, and any other thing you can think of as a visitor or non-human intelligence. Second, where do they come from? And of course, once we know what they are and where they come from, their being and becoming, I'll address the question, what, if anything, can we do about it? I'll also try to offer another resolution to the Fermi paradox, but that might be a little too much for me. We'll see. To begin with, I'll mention the usually stoned but totally awesome philosopher-botanist Terence McKenna, who offered three logical possibilities as to the ontology of visitors. He said these visitors have been and still are in sort of an ontological limbo. He offers these three possibilities. First, that they're physical, just very rare. Some sort of zoological taxa, but very good at not being seen, just like the Yeti or Bigfoot. Neil deGrasse Tyson's fascinatingly disturbing thought is based on Carl Sagan's observation that visitors would likely be orders of magnitude different from us. Determining their motivation would be the same as a worm or a dog or a cat trying to determine our motivation. But the point is basically that they're physical, just very rare. Second, that they are a product of the mind McKenna calls the Jungian position. That is, aliens are sort of products or projections of the unconscious mind that seem to take on their own autonomy. But any communication happens to us in what amounts to the dream state, such that the goal becomes to discover the meaning of the symbols that occur during contacts or abductions. In other words, as Sting's lyric, When the Angels Fall, says, perhaps the dream is dreaming us, just like Carl Jung's UFO dream. Perhaps the aliens are dreaming us, and not the other way around. Third is the idea that most closely matches witness descriptions of these visitors. They might be non-physical, but are yet autonomous. In other words, they look like symbols from dreams, but they really are autonomous agents not entirely produced by the human mind. They exist independent of us. We're just tapping into them somehow. Now, it does turn out that there is, if you're interested, a pretty reliable way to encounter these visitors, and that is by taking psychedelics to expand your awareness. But I'm not ready to recommend that, because there might be a better way. What I'd like to do is offer a hypothesis with the utmost explanatory power possible. To do that, my hypothesis would need to incorporate McKenna's three logical possibilities all at the same time. Now that is quite a challenge, since these possibilities can't all be true, but it won't be as difficult as the rest of these. My hypothesis should also account for high strangeness, those completely out of the blue, odd and strange experiences of reptilians and buffalo, operating tables and implants, as well as this often reported loss of self and loss of self-control during an encounter. It should account for the dual aspect nature of these experiences, where people describe encounters both as euphoric and extremely disturbing. As a bonus, it would be great if my hypothesis could explain how and why these visitors have been a constant companion to humanity since recorded history. In other words, it should have a convincing way to account not only for our modern-day greys and other humanoid visitors, but also for those angels, demons, ghosts, spirits, gremlins, elementals, and whatever other beings or non-human intelligences that seem to be imparting information we are incapable of knowing. Finally, I'm sorry to disappoint again, but my attempt to account for all of these aspects of aliens does leave unanswered the question of UFOs, the alleged craft that are coming from other dimensions or solar systems, or Carl Sagan's guess, the dark side of the moon. Sorry, I can't do it all again, but maybe you can after listening to this. So let's start here. The astronomer, research scientist, and UFO authority J. Allen Hynek, based on his work on Project Blue Book and the Condon Report of 1968, was not too keen on close encounters of the third kind. Unlike UFO craft, Hynek was concerned that ETs didn't lend themselves to scientific investigation straightforwardly. In fact, in his book The UFO Experience, Hynek lamented that encounters with humanoid occupants of craft tend to throw the investigations of UFOs into disrepute and ridicule. UFOs? Maybe. But humanoid occupants? No way. That's on the fringe, man. That is the stuff of little green men. But the problem Hynek acknowledged is that if encounters with entities are a thing of our imagination, then so must be ordinary reports of UFOs. The real problem is all these reputable witnesses and no reliable way to investigate them. So Hynek asks the following questions. Are then all of these reporters of UFOs truly sick? If so, what is the sickness? Are these people all affected by some strange virus that does not attack sensible people? What a strange sickness this must be, attacking people in all walks of life, regardless of training or vocation, and making them for a very limited period of time, only minutes sometimes, behave in a strange way and see things that are belied by the reliable and stable manner and actions they exhibit in the rest of their lives. A virus? Let's look at that here. That's where I'd like to go. The virus, as an analogy, could be very helpful to us. We could think about an entity or a visitor as situated between the living and non-living. It's an entity, it's real, but may not actually be living, it just appears to be. We can look at paranormal investigations and ghost hunts as encountering a virus that seems to have intelligent autonomy capable of communicating with us, but also plays like a broken record doing the same thing over and over again in what are called residual hauntings. Second, a virus requires some medium in which to replicate. Well, so could aliens. And yet we have not been able to get a recording of one on tape unless you buy into the alien autopsy video. The point is that, like a virus, living organisms could give rise to aliens, which allows them a medium to replicate. So we'd have to look at what that medium would be. Well, let's see. Viruses are information. In this way, aliens could consist of information. It could allow for all of the information in an encounter that gets spit back to us with all sorts of bizarre features like the ill logic in a dream state. You know, Carl Sagan says, "We are an interesting species, capable of such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares." So the virus analogy might allow us to account for our involvement in this dual aspect nature of contacts. Finally, viruses have a way to coat themselves as they jump from one organism to the next. Likewise, aliens may have a structure and endurance to jump from individual to individual and across time, and to survive from generation to generation and culture to culture, infecting otherwise sensible people. Interesting. I guess we just need to figure out the medium they use. Well, let's go with the idea that aliens are like viruses. Instead of inviting you on the path of my reasoning in a way that appears to be deceitful and manipulative, I'll just get right to the point. Here's the answer to all of those questions. I won't make you wait. The virus analogy yields the following hypothesis. This is what I think aliens are, where they come from, the medium they use, and what we can do about it. Visitors, I'm saying, are situated between the living and non-living, most closely resembling a virus. Visitors are an overlapping assembly, a nexus, of unassimilated abstract thought forms of information. Visitors are a byproduct of self-sustaining confusion. Each of these strands of thought forms have something akin to free radicals that can set off a chain reaction, permitting them to spread via a medium of thought, making them available to be picked up by other hosts, human beings in particular. These thought forms mostly resemble various characteristics we think of as symptoms of a personality disorder, and as such are typically based in fear of the other. Contactees, abductees, or so-called sensitives are trying to assimilate them, and so should we. In other words, half an alien must ipso facto be half not alien. But can an alien be said to be an entire alien when half the alien has been removed from any one of my hypotheses? Well, the answer is pretty philosophical, but it looks like this. Visitors are us, yet they are not us. They're in us, and yet not in us. They're real, but not in the same sense we think of things as being real. We're making them while we make sense of them, and yet somehow they must have been here before we were here. In any event, we have no choice but to assimilate them, which will be the main point from here on. And finally, in other words, this is what I'm trying to propose. All thoughts have form. A thought based on fear takes on a form of its own. A fear-based thought that gets believed takes on a life of its own, that is, an alien entity. A community of believed fear-based thoughts is an alien race or a species. These beings stick around as information to be assimilated. Digestion of these thoughts is maddening, horrifying, and disgusting, but successful assimilation is blissful, euphoric, expansive, and liberating. So to more fully articulate all the language I've just used so far in describing my view of the ontology of aliens, I'm going to let you know a little bit more about how this hypothesis was formulated. And to do that, I'm going to summarize some ideas from individuals who served as exemplars for me. This is the lineup of my suspects. Looks like a rowdy bunch. Mind you, none of the figures pictured above have ever had anything to say about aliens or UFOs, at least that I know of, but I would never let that stop me. First is the unknown, unnamed individual referred to in a Facebook discussion group on the UNO MUFON UFO Society group page. Either that or it was the UF Omaha page. I can't remember. But regardless, this individual was relating how a friend of his was formulating a hypothesis about aliens as that of parasites. I thought about this a little bit myself. Parasites are most definitely living, but for all we know at the moment, aliens are just as likely not living. In fact, they resemble robots just as much as they resemble living things. Second, parasites require a host, which aliens don't seem to require. At least they don't seem to have that limitation. Third, the parasite analogy could not explain how these beings have changed form and adapted over time. Parasites just die when the host dies. Anyway, finally and most importantly, parasites are mostly known for their always being harmful to the host, which is clearly not the case with aliens. We have reports of people undergoing profound change and expanded awareness following encounters. There are often reported post-traumatic stress symptoms associated with encounters, but when contactees process this information, they just as often report how they appreciate having had an experience of a potential wider reality. In any event, this got me thinking along the lines of a better biological metaphor, which led me to the analogy of a virus. So thank you, unnamed friend of a Facebook poster. You got me thinking about parasites, which I denied, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up with the idea of a virus. Next, I'd like to cover two ideas based on the work of the theoretical physicist David Bohm. Quantum theory and the idea of the universe as a process of assimilation. The three aspects of quantum theory are, according to Bohm, and put very briefly, 1, that indivisible quantum processes underlie everything. 2, the indeterminacy probability of matter exemplified by the wave-particle duality. And 3, non-locality, the immediate connection of distant particles, which is a puzzle, since observation tells us the speed of light has a limit, and nothing should be able to communicate instantaneously. In fact, all of these aspects present us with a paradox. The idea is that these three aspects of quantum theory suggest an unbroken universe, an unfolding, dynamic whole at the core, a unity or wholeness which Bohm describes as the implicate order. That's the center of this diagram here. Now, there is a problem with conceptualizing the universe in this way. We need to choose words that avoid describing the universe as a unity or any other positive attribute. Why is that? Well, because every concept we use only makes sense in terms of its opposite, and there would be no opposites in a completely unfragmented unity or whole. We can only say that the universe is not this or not that in a way that we could try to point to what it resembles. We can never quite get there. So I'll just ask you to permit me to say the universe only appears to be fragmented, which is Bohm's notion of the explicate order. The second idea Bohm has to do with thought and experience and the process of reality. That's right, a process of reality. Instead of a Darwinist interpretation that says all evolution is based on the need for survival, Bohm suggests every aspect of the universe is in a process of assimilating everything else, shoring up all these apparently loose fragments. And that this applies to how thought itself works. I will return to the notion of assimilation, confusion, and self-sustaining confusion, since they form the basis of my ontology of visitors, but suffice to say now that aliens are basically a process of assimilation gone bad, which Bohm calls confusion, which can lead to self-sustaining confusion. Now, self-sustaining confusion amounts to being convinced of a belief that this particular image of the world is a real free roaming fragment, which is impossible in an unfragmented world of unity. Okay, so next. ALFRED North Whitehead's process philosophy works nicely with the work of David Bohm, in part because Whitehead was just about the first philosopher to really take seriously what modern physics and quantum mechanics was telling us about the world. The ontology of Whitehead is that the world is not made up of parts or fragments or objects or a substance of any kind. The universe is made up of processes. In other words, processes of becoming rather than objects that are made up of some substance. I believe this process is what Bohm calls assimilation. Whitehead acknowledges quantum theory by saying, quote, "In a certain sense, everything is everywhere at all times. For every location involves an aspect of itself in every other location. Thus, every spatio-temporal standpoint mirrors the world." End quote. Whitehead's ontology says that there are two types of entities, actual entities and abstractions or conceptual entities. Actual entities, with one exception, are temporal. They really exist in the natural world as spatio-temporal events, but they are not made of any substance. Instead, he calls them occasions of experience. So an actual entity is not a thing that is happening. It's how something is happening and how this process of happening is related to other actual entities that are also happening. For example, you sitting here listening to this are not made of anything. You are what Whitehead calls an enduring physical object made up of experience. You and I are a nexus of temporarily overlapping occasions of experience. You are not what is happening right now. You are an indefinite series of experiences. I hope that's a comforting thought. Anyway, the second kind of entity Whitehead proposes is what I'm interested in here. Abstract entities or abstractions are what I believe aliens most resemble. An abstraction is a conceptual entity that involves more than one single actual entity. I'll return to this in a moment, but for now I'd like you to see where I'm going by quoting Whitehead's ontological principle. Whatever reality pertains to an abstraction is derived from the actual entities upon which it is founded or of which it is comprised. So try to hold that thought for a moment. Okay, next up, I'm interested in consciousness, the thing these aliens are apparently able to overtake during an encounter. How can you lose a sense of self and lose track of time during an encounter? Well, in his book Self Comes to Mind, neurologist and neurobiologist Antonio Damasio uses case evidence from neurology patients to propose an explanation for consciousness, which he defines as an awareness of self and others. It's not as if consciousness is exclusive to human beings or is a gift given to us by our neocortex, our thinking cap. One obvious reason is because individuals born without a neocortex, believe it or not, have likes and dislikes. They express emotions, and in every way meaningful not only have a mind, but are also most certainly conscious. Instead, Damasio considers consciousness as a triad of wakefulness, mind, and a self process. Now, we think of being conscious as basically being awake and not asleep. That's easy to understand, but what is the mind? The mind, Damasio says, is the capacity to make images of the body and the world around us. The brain is all about the body, so Damasio argues that the brain is a sophisticated map-making instrument sending us information about the body and what it is experiencing. A mind is a map-making apparatus, and all animals have a map-making apparatus too, but most animals do not appear to directly experience their mind. Dogs and cats have minds, but may only be a little conscious. Now, why is that? Because it turns out a sense of self requires a process of the self coming to the mind, hence the title of his book. The proto-self begins in the brainstem, probably the superior colliculus. The core self is characterized as having no sense of time, but is a process where images in the mind begin to get modified. And then finally, the autobiographical self consists of modifying images of the mind on a large scale. So we have that process of becoming a self. The bottom line here is that the mind originates subcortically and is basically a map-making apparatus. I'm concerned with two ideas. What goes wrong when the mind cannot get an image or experience to match up with its current map of the world? And two, how fragile and fleeting the self is. Okay, so what does all this look like, and how do you get a sense of this ontology I'm after? Think of Bohm's implicate order, that is, the unity and wholeness of which we can't speak. The universe can be thought of as a constant process of assimilation, a process of making similar, apparently fragmented information, a constant process of emerging creativity where the explicate order becomes assimilated or made similar in the implicate order. Think also of the map-making ability of minds as described by Damasio, and what happens when images don't match observation. This, Bohm calls confusion. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. What happens when a conscious being, that is, a self that has come to mind, reacts and defends itself against an image it cannot assimilate? When a self believes an experience does not fit and is not part of the whole, well, that is also a process Bohm calls self-sustaining confusion. Now, think of Whitehead's notion that the universe is made up of actual entities, which are occasions of experience. These actual entities, like you and me, for example, are, in this view, overlapping occasions of experience. This allows us the experience of personhood. Now, Damasio might call this a self that comes to mind. Whitehead says society is just a nexus of actual entities, which makes enough sense, but a society is not an actual entity. Society is made of actual entities. So my argument here is that aliens are a nexus of unassimilated thoughts that have gathered together into a nexus of abstractions. This makes aliens real insofar as they are derived from actual entities, but they don't have to be derived from us. Aliens themselves are not like rocks or people or bridges or donuts. Entities like you and me are what Whitehead calls enduring physical objects. Whereas aliens are not enduring physical objects. Aliens are abstract entities, a nexus of unassimilated thought forms. They are a process, and they are processes of self-sustaining confusion. They are derived from actual entities that get dragged away from their actuality to form an abstract entity. Now that's a lot of philosophical talk. Let me try to explain this in a different way. So consider, as Bohm does, the process of digestion. Eating is a process of assimilation. Trying to assimilate foods your body can't handle confuses the body. Not eating foods your body needs makes you malnourished and prone to illness. Well, minds work the same way in regard to experiences. Some things we just can't tolerate, and some things we need we just tend to avoid. This means aliens are not merely your undigested food or your excrement. Aliens are viruses that migrate from one actual entity to another, going for a ride, as it were, on the images that minds were unable to assimilate. They are information that minds are trying to assemble into an intelligible whole, in the same way the body's trying to become healthy and whole. It's just that we don't have the stomach for aliens, in the same way we don't have stomach the morning after. So, bottom line, what are they? Aliens exist and are real in this ontology. They consist of our most beautiful dreams and our worst nightmares. They exist as information, unassimilated abstract thought forms that can be shared and spread. Some contain so much abstract thought that they exist as intelligent entities, either constituted of a previously embodied thoughts of an actual entity, or an entity that ghost hunters report as never having been embodied or incarnated before. As they ride along the streams of thought as their medium, in this process, they can spread from individual to individual, from culture to culture, and across time and generations. Where do they come from? Well, the virus analogy suggests they come from living organisms, but not necessarily fully conscious organisms. This, incidentally, could explain how animals might be able to sense them as danger. Dogs and cats sensing ghosts and spirits and bad weather and maybe a whole bunch of other things. That would be a nice little bonus to this hypothesis, wouldn't it? Well, conscious human beings like us sustain them. We breed them, so to speak, by repeatedly trying to assimilate them unsuccessfully. This happens as we try to form a thought. They can populate in an individual, like Linda Blair and The Exorcist, for example, but also in cultures throughout history, just in different forms. The fact that every culture can't be expected to be free of self-sustaining confusion suggests how and why these visitors can take different forms, from the menehune on the Hawaiian Islands, to gnomes, sprites, and fairies in Europe, to the various little people unique to different cultures, all the way to ghostly apparitions and extraterrestrial visitors in the modern information age. Actual agents and cultures from thoughts or images of the way the world is, and we're doing the best we can, but it's not a perfect process at all. That's the problem. So, anyway, what can we do about it? Well, it would make sense that we should take care of the thoughts that we have already created and stop making new ones. In other words, fish out the ones downstream in our nets and then stop throwing in new ones from upstream. Stop all the self-sustaining confusion to begin with and pick up and take out the trash for the rest. To do this, here are some ideas. Consider you are not an isolated separate self, but rather a process of events or occasions of experience in an unfragmented universe. Recognize your tendency to engage in self-sustaining confusion as a desperate attempt to preserve this illusion that you are an isolated separate self. For God's sake, stop it. And then assimilate them. Assimilate these abstract entities. Assimilate your own confusion and the confusion of others without fear. Use trust instead. In other words, get good at cleaning up your own house first, and then go out and help clean out other places. Connect with yourself and your surroundings. Notice the way things are by using careful observation and attention. Just as you trust your liver, your heart, and your digestive system to keep you alive and healthy, give up any sense of control you have over those organs in the same way give up sense of control you have over other people. Expand your ability to assimilate things that don't make sense and trust there is a reason they have become one of the occasions in your experience. You know, these aliens, they just want to be loved, right? Finally, I want to give you a shout out to those people who have had experiences of these visitors, since I'm not one of you. I'd like to thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I'd like to appreciate those contactees, abductees, and sensitives who, for all I know, may be the only ones out there with the guts to try and assimilate these little buggers. Perhaps you are not the loons bringing disrepute and ridicule to ufology. Perhaps you are the courageous and sensible ones trying to clean up everyone else's messes by making sense of the senseless. You may very well be the pioneers out there in the Old West trying to establish law and order, just like Wyatt Earp. You're not perfect, that's for sure, but neither was Wyatt Earp. I trust you are doing the best you can to assimilate your experience, and I thank you for your service. All right, I'm already way long on time, but for the sake of argument, let's pass this ontology through the Fermi paradox. Let's say 5% of ETs are not abstract entities, but are actual entities, actual extraterrestrials. Well, they started showing up in droves in the 40s and 50s, which skyrocketed in the 60s, but have since all but disappeared into this ontological limbo of living and non-living. Well, perhaps they came here because we split the atom. That is, because we were the adolescents who found the keys to the liquor cabinet. Look out. Perhaps they tried to help us avoid nuclear war, buzzing around the U.S. Capitol and at nuclear facilities. Perhaps they succeeded, and then perhaps they left because they found us already overrun by the abstract entities of our own making. I certainly didn't want to be confused with our own horrible nightmares. And then the jerks showed up with their copy of Adobe Photoshop, and so the aliens left. That's why there's basically 100% chance the universe is teeming with life, and why there's almost no chance they're currently visiting with us in their craft, or else we would have captured one on a cell phone by now. Well, because we were visited back in the glory days of ufology, and then they left to hide and wait until we might be ready for our first contact. Maybe they've retreated to the realm of the abstract to try and help us assimilate our demons. Who knows? Perhaps they're waiting. Perhaps they're waiting for the jerks to go away, those hoaxers, the Photoshop jerks, so that that'll prepare us better for their return. Well, thank you. Again, please feel free to check out the website omahaufostudygroup.com for more ideas and information. Heck, form your own hypothesis. Or check us out on Facebook by searching UNO UFO MUFON Society. Nebraska is the good life, with friendly people and a safe place to mend your nets and make the unconscious conscious. So until next time, thanks for watching, don't be a jerk, and go Big Red.